name is Juliet, and I am going to show you guys kind of the ins and outs of maple sugaring, okay? Maple sugaring is typically done in the springtime, so things we're looking for outside is you have birds start to sing again, there's buds that are starting to grow on the trees, you're seeing more wildlife around. Those are all good times that we're starting to hit spring. And spring is the best time for maple sugaring because we're looking for the sap to start flowing in our trees, okay? Within the trees, we've got xylem and phloem. Those are the tubes that move water and nutrients up and down in the tree, and they also are what carry the sap. So we need that sap to be flowing. It's all frozen over winter, and we need that to be moving so that we can actually collect it. So there are certain circumstances that we want. Typically speaking, we're looking for about 20-degree nights and 45-degree days. This means that the trees are kind of contracting and expanding as it gets cold and warm. And that starts to kind of pump that sap through the tree again and gives us really good flow for maple sugaring, okay? So those are the conditions we're looking for. We want it to be spring. Now, professional maple sugarers will usually start sometime around February, but for us around here, we usually start in March, okay? And it can go all the way through April until we start to have nights that aren't too cold anymore, all right? So, obviously, we need to make sure we pick the right tree. And for maple sugaring, we want maple trees. Now, it's kind of hard to tell when we don't have those awesome hand-shaped maple leaves to look for. So there are some things that we can do to pick out our maple tree specifically. And that's usually by the buds and the branches. So I've got a couple branches here. Okay. And this one over here is not a maple, but this one is. So if we take a look at this branch here, okay, this is what we call alternate branching, which means that we kind of skip a step. I've got one branch here, but it doesn't have a buddy. And then this branch I have up here, but it doesn't have a buddy. They kind of zigzag across the branch, okay? That's alternate branching. Whereas this tree right here has opposite branching. Every branch has a buddy, okay? So opposite branches. That's how we know it's a maple, those opposite branches. And also at the ends of the branches, if you look up high into the tree, you can see red buds, okay? Lots of little red dots, all right? And that helps you know that it's a maple. There's only 3 trees that have this opposite branching, the maples, ashes, and dogwoods. But if you look for opposite branching and those red buds, you've most likely got yourself a maple, okay? So then, how big of a tree do you need to tap? Typically speaking, you don't want to tap a tree that's less than 1 foot in diameter. So this is about as small as I would go, something about this wide, okay? Because if it's too small and you drill into those holes, we're doing more harm than good. And it's okay to tap a tree. It will heal, and that's perfectly fine. But you don't want to do it when a tree is too young. So a foot or bigger, all right? Now you'll notice that this is our little practice stump. It has lots of holes and they're all very close together, okay? If a tree has been tapped in previous years, you want to leave some room, 3 or 4 inches, and don't do it at the exact same height. You know, go a little bit up or a little bit down with your holes so that you're not going through the scar that's going to form on this tree. Okay, you want to be outside of that scar. Otherwise, you're not going to have any flow for your maple syrup, okay? But when you do find a tree and you find a good spot to drill, okay, you want to drill about 2 to 4 feet off the ground. So for me, I'm 5 foot tall. I usually drill at about chest height. If you're a lot taller, you can go lower. It doesn't really matter. But you don't want to be at the very bottom, and certainly you don't want to drill too high up because then it's going to be too hard to collect your maple syrup, okay? And the drills that we use hand drills, but you could certainly use a power drill too. But what you're looking for is a 3/8 inch bit, okay? So not quite half an inch, it's a little bit smaller, all right? And you're gonna take this and you're going to drill into your tree, all right? And I'll show you more when we're outside. When you are ready to tap a tree and you found your good maple tree, there are 6 things that you need. So you do need a drill to tap into your tree with. You need some kind of a bucket, okay? You want some nails so that you can hang your bucket from the tree. So that means you also need a hammer, a spile, whether it's metal or a wood one, and then also a lid. So when we're tapping trees, we want to make sure that the place that we pick to tap is about halfway up on you. I'm short, so I go more at my shoulders, but somewhere up on your shoulders, and the tree that you pick, you want to be over a foot wide in diameter, okay? So this is a good spot right here. So I'm just going to pick my spot and drill. And you want to drill about the length of your pinky. You'll see the wood starting to come out. There we go. And mainly we want to get past that bark layer into the softer wood, because that's where the sap is going to be flowing. Okay, reverse. I haven't quite gotten to my first knuckle, so I'm gonna go a little farther. Okay. There we go, that's a lot better. Okay, so it's up to the knuckle, the second knuckle on my pinky. And I can feel that it is even a little bit wet in here, which is good, which means that we're where the sap is going to be running. So, next step, okay, is to get our bucket ready, okay? And I like to do this part first because sometimes I forget and then I try to put the spile on and I don't have my bucket in a good spot. So, you wanna get your nail and you wanna make sure you put it under the hole that you just drilled and up at a little bit of an angle so that it'll hold that bucket. And that sound right there is one of the reasons why we call it tapping. Between that sound and, I'll use a wooden spile, the sound of tapping the spile into the tree. There we go. So then all that's left to do is take your bucket, hook it on and make sure that your spile would be dripping into the bucket. And we want to cover it with a lid. And this lid is important because we don't want any bugs getting in here. And some bugs still will, but we also don't want animals crawling into here. So it'll just help prevent extra wildlife from getting into your sap. And that's it. But at home, you probably don't have these fancy buckets. So you can use a milk jug. And all you have to do is here we fashioned a little piece of wire, an old hanger, or even just some yarn, and you can make yourself a little hook onto your handle and put a little hole in there that's big enough for your spile. So that you can just take this milk jug and your nail would go higher up on the tree. And you stick your spile in that hole and it'll be all good for collecting syrup. And it is already covered with its cap, so you don't need any other lid. And it'll keep almost everything out of it for you, okay? So this is a great way to collect your sap. And if you do want to make maple syrup, you're going to need a lot of sap. Sap, when you collect it, pretty much looks just like water. Sap is only about 2% sugar, okay? 2 to 3% sugar, which means that doesn't look like much. Now, if you do taste it coming out of the spile, you can taste the tiniest little bit of sweetness on it, but it's not a lot, which means to boil this down, to get enough syrup for 1 gallon of syrup, you're gonna need 40 gallons of sap. That is a lot of sap because it is such a low sugar content, okay? So So if you're gathering at home, you're gonna be tapping a lot of trees if you want to make this much syrup, okay? But you don't have to make a gallon. You can make whatever you want out of whatever you gather, okay? And to make that syrup, we're gonna go into the kitchen so we can talk about the process of boiling it down to get it to the right consistency. So if you do want to make your own maple syrup, okay, obviously you want to start with sap to get something that ends up looking like this, okay? So you take your sap, you put it in a pot, and you are going to need a candy thermometer, okay? We're not quite following the exact same things on here because the sugar content is not quite the same as normal sugar. So you're not going to be following the exact, you know, softball, hardball kind of temperatures on a thermometer. Instead, we're looking for almost 220 degrees boiling for syrup. And you're just going to put your sap in there and you're just going to let it go, because you want to get all of that water out. It's 98% water. It's going to take a while. So you want to bring it to that boil around 219 degrees and just let it sit until it's the consistency that you want it to be, okay? But if you want to make your own candy, you can start with obviously store-bought syrup if you want to. Make sure that it's actual maple syrup, not the fake stuff. And for this, we're using this and we're going to boil it down so that we can make candy. And to make candy, it really doesn't involve any other ingredients other than pure maple syrup and a tiny bit of butter, okay? So first things first, we want to make sure that we have a pan ready for once our candy is done. So we're just gonna take this pan and we are going to grease it using butter, okay? And you do want to use butter, not oil. It just works better that way. So we're gonna grease up our pan. Otherwise, all of that candy is gonna stick to this and it is never going to come off. So make sure you get all around the edges too of whatever pan you're using. Okay, that looks good. All right, nice and coated. And then you want your maple syrup in your pot. It doesn't matter how much you want to use, it's kind of up to you. This is a quart. It takes half a quart to make the smallest batch I can make here. And by the smallest batch, what I'm talking about is that you need the maple syrup to be able to cover the ball of the thermometer, okay? So however high off of the bottom of your pot your thermometer is, you at least have to have maple syrup to cover that. And for us, with this pot and this thermometer, half a quart usually does it. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour all of this in here. Oop, we got some crystals on the outside edges, that's okay. Into the pot it goes. You'll notice that this is a slightly older bottle of maple syrup. It actually has some crystals in the bottom of it itself. It is still perfectly safe to use. It just needs to be heated again to melt down those crystals. So not a big deal. It's kind of the same thing with honey when honey starts to crystallize, okay? And we are going to kind of go on a medium-high heat. Okay. And now we wait. Now, we do have the butter here, and I'm gonna put a little bit of this in here now. And you need maybe half a pat of butter. It doesn't have to be a lot. But what this butter does in the maple syrup, you'll notice when it starts to cook more, is that it starts to get frothy and bubbly. And putting just a little bit of butter in, that kind of puts a little layer of oil over the top of it, and it'll stop it from frothing up, which makes the process a whole lot easier on you. So we're just gonna break this up into little pieces, sprinkle it across the top, because right now obviously the syrup is pretty hard, so the butter's just gonna land on top. So we wanna spread it out. There we go. And now we wait. So at this point, we're finally starting to have a nice boil. We're only at about 200 degrees. We want to get to about 236 degrees for maple candy, which is not quite a softball yet on your sugar scale, okay? So we want to keep an eye on this. If it starts to get too frothy, feel free to go ahead and take a spoon. I prefer to use a wooden spoon and give it a little bit of a stir from time to time. But the bubbles is what we want to start to pay attention to, because as it starts to boil and simmer down, those bubbles, when it hits around that 236 degrees, are going to become kind of opaque. Right now, they're clear bubbles, okay? It's just like you were boiling water. But we want something that's not really shiny anymore, which is a hard thing to describe, but once you see it, you'll know what I'm talking about. So we're at about 215 degrees right now, so we're getting closer. It's starting to bubble, and some of my bubbles are starting to look opaque as they get bigger bubbles, okay? So what's gonna happen next when we do get up to 236 degrees, okay? And we see all of those bubbles, we don't have any shiny bubbles anymore. We're going to take it off the heat, and we are going to stir it like our life depends on it. And you are just going to keep stirring and stirring and stirring. And you'll start to notice on your spoon that little white crystals are gonna start to form, okay? And it starts to look like almost as if there's salt in it, okay? You can see the little grains of sugar starting to form. And so you're gonna stir and stir and stir and stir and stir. And when that starts to happen, when you start to see those little crystals, we're going to immediately pour it out onto our buttered sheet, okay? And then it's gonna harden up on us. Now, if you pour it out and you realize that you didn't get it to quite hot enough temperature, it cools down pretty quickly. It should cool down in not even 5 minutes. So if you realize that, oh, well, this is still too sticky, maybe you made jack wax, which is a little bit more like taffy, so it's not quite as hard as the sugar. Or if you're not happy with the results, it's just maple syrup. Just put it back in the hot pot, melt it down, and start over again. And if you think that you're having too much issues, just even at this stage, there is no problem with just stopping the cooking process, letting it cool, and heating it back up again to try again. Another helpful hint, if you're not quite sure if you're at the right stage yet, is when you're stirring with your spoon, like right now, if you look at this, this is really, really frothy, okay? So we're starting to get those bubbles. I still have shiny bubbles, okay? So that means I'm not quite ready yet. But also my spoon, when I take it out, okay, and I set it on my plate, you know, stuff is gonna come off of that. And as that cools, you'll be able to tell if you're there yet. So this stuff, as it's cooling down, it's still sticky, but it's not really turning solid, which helps me know that I'm not quite at the right end stages yet. Because sometimes it's hard, and you say, oh, those bubbles look like they're ready, even though it's not at 230 degrees yet. And I just trust my spoon, and I say, no, 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 just wait. And you'll be able to start to see when it's really turning into candy. I'm just past 230 degrees. My bubbles are looking opaque. This means that it's time to take it off the heat, and the quick process begins. Okay, so like I talked about, I'm gonna take it off. I'll take my thermometer out of the pot just so it's out of my way. And then we are going to stir and stir and stir until it starts to crystallize. Just when it starts to crystallize, the minute we see that, we want to pour it into the pan. Sometimes you'll see maple candies that have that white stuff in the middle. That just means that they're formed crystals that were a little bit too big. So they're imperfections, but it's still perfectly safe to eat. So if you do end up with that, that's okay. But that just means you took it a little too far, and you know for next time. Look at that beautiful caramel color that we have gotten. And part of this quick stirring is helping to cool it down, and that's what's helping to build those crystals. I'm gonna check my spoon. It's kind of looking like I have some stuff starting. See all those little bubbles? Those are crystals. I don't want those to get too far on me. I'm gonna stir a little bit more. Okay, and you'll notice that as it splashes up,
It's getting thicker. It's not coming down as quickly. So that's telling me that I'm almost there. I want to stir just a little bit more. Okay, I'm gonna stop. Oh yeah, I see lots of bubbles coming to the surface. And if I go slowly, it feels a lot thicker than it did. I think it needs just a bit more though. This is something that's kind of a hard process to learn. It's a lot by feel. So if you mess it up the first time, that's okay. Just put it back onto the heat and keep boiling until you get it where you want it to go. Okay, I think I'm happy with that. I have lots of those little white bubbles popping to the surface. Those are our crystals. So we are going to pour. And I know that this has gone far enough because if you look closely at that, you can see those little white bits at the top. That's already starting to crystallize. So I know that the rest of it should be plenty far enough to turn into candy as well. So now we just have to wait until it cools down and then we're ready to try it. And there you have it, your own maple sugar candy. Now to get this out of here, here at Sarett, we just kind of score it with a knife and break it out. We don't care if they're, you know, great shapes or whatnot. You could also have poured this into silicone molds, whatever you would like to do. And you will notice that this crystallized a bit too much. Those are those little white bits I was talking about. So I probably could have stopped stirring a little bit sooner, but that's okay, because this is still going to be delicious.